Early Jewish mysticism was more than just visions or rituals. It was a journey through layers of reality, where every step brought the mystic closer to the divine. This path was shaped by ancient secrets, powerful rituals, and the union of mysticism and magic, each one essential to reaching a higher state of understanding and enlightenment. In Part 1, we explored the foundations of early Jewish mysticism, uncovering the mystical texts and practices that shaped the Western esoteric tradition. From the visionary ascents of Merkabah mysticism to the profound teachings of Sefer Yetzirah, we saw how the pursuit of hidden divine knowledge intertwined with rituals, divine names, and the mystical use of sacred power. Now, in Part 2, we'll delve deeper into the Hekhalot literature, where the mystical ascent and magical practices converged, creating a profound understanding of the divine realm that would influence later mystical traditions like Kabbalah. Mysticism is generally seen as the pursuit of a direct personal encounter with the divine, an experience of spiritual transformation or illumination. In contrast, magic is typically viewed as the use of rituals, symbols, and words to control or influence spiritual forces and the natural world. However, the distinction between mysticism and magic in early Jewish mysticism is not always clear. In fact, the Hekhalot literature, the central mystical texts, often intertwine both mystical experiences and magical practices, blurring the lines between the two. For instance, macabre mysticism involves visionary journeys through heavenly realms, where the mystic seeks to experience God's presence, but this journey also requires magical rituals. These rituals often involve chanting divine names, performing specific acts, and invoking angels to help guide the mystic through the heavens. The use of divine names and angelic invocations is common, suggesting that magical practices were employed to achieve the mystical experience. The key takeaway here is that early Jewish mysticism didn't see mysticism and magic as opposites. Instead, they were complementary practices. The mystic would use magical methods to facilitate the experience of divine contact, and the ultimate goal was spiritual transformation and divine wisdom, which aligns with the core principles of mysticism. This blurring of mysticism and magic is foundational to understanding early Jewish esoteric practices and shows how these traditions laid the groundwork for the complex mystical and magical systems that would emerge in later periods, especially Kabbalah. The Hekhalot literature provides the clearest example of how mysticism and magic worked together in early Jewish thought. These texts describe the mystic's journey through multiple heavenly palaces, each guarded by angels who test and challenge the mystic's knowledge and purity. In many ways, this journey is both mystical and magical. In the Hekhalot tradition, the mystical ascent is a journey through layers of heaven, with each palace representing a different level of spiritual enlightenment. As the mystic ascends, they encounter angelic beings who guard the gates to the next level. These angels can only be bypassed if the mystic knows the correct divine names, chants the right hymns, and performs specific rituals. These actions are distinctly magical, as they involve the use of symbols, words, and divine names to influence the spiritual realm and gain access to higher levels of knowledge. At the same time, the ultimate goal of the journey is mystical, to encounter God's throne and receive divine knowledge. The mystic soul is transformed through this encounter, gaining wisdom and enlightenment that leads to spiritual union with the divine. This union is the core of mystical practice, the divine experience that transforms the mystic's understanding of the world and their place in it. Thus, Hekhalot literature provides a fascinating model of how both mysticism and magic were intertwined in early Jewish traditions. The mystical journey could not be completed without the magical practices, and the magical rituals were designed to facilitate the mystical experience of the divine. The Hekhalot literature is rich in symbolism, much of which is deeply intertwined with both mystical and magical practices. The journey through the heavenly palaces is filled with symbolic imagery that reflects the mystic's spiritual ascent and transformation. For example, the fiery chariot in the book of Ezekiel is used as a symbol of the divine presence, and the seven heavens represent different stages of spiritual growth. One of the most significant symbols in Hekhalot literature is the divine throne. The throne represents God's presence, and the mystic's goal is to reach it and witness God's glory. The journey to the throne is perilous and requires great spiritual preparation. The mystic must purify themselves through rituals and avoid the dangers that await those who are not ready to face the divine. The fiery nature of God's throne symbolizes the intensity of the divine presence, which can be overwhelming and even destructive for the unprepared. Alongside the divine throne, angelic beings play a crucial role in these texts. Angels are seen as intermediaries between the mystic and God. They serve as guides through the heavenly realms and protect the mystic from the dangers of the divine fire. The angelic hierarchies described in Hekhalot literature reflect the deeply structured nature of the mystical universe, where each level of heaven is governed by different angels and spiritual beings. Another striking element in these texts is the measurements of God's body. In works like Shiur Koma, the mystical texts describe God's body in immense symbolic dimensions. For instance, stating that God's eye is thousands of miles wide. These measurements are not meant to be taken literally. Instead, they are intended to convey the incomprehensible scale of the divine. The symbolic use of measurements emphasizes the gap between the human and the divine, reinforcing the idea that God's presence is beyond human understanding. The impact of early Jewish mysticism on Kabbalah is profound. Kabbalah, which emerged in the 12th and 13th centuries, built on many of the ideas and practices found in Hekhalot literature. The concept of Sephirot, divine emanations in Kabbalah for example, is rooted in the divine structure described in the earlier mystical texts. The angelic realms and the idea of ascension through heavenly layers were also key elements that were carried over into Kabbalistic thought. The Kabbalistic tree of life, with its 10 Sephirot, can be seen as an evolution of the symbolic imagery found in early Jewish mysticism. The Sephirot represent different aspects of divine reality, and the mystical ascent through the Sephirot mirrors the journey through the heavens described in the Hekhalot texts. The concept of divine light and the transformation of the soul through contact with the divine, which is central to Kabbalah, also has its roots in these earlier mystical practices. Jewish mysticism also influenced Christian esotericism and the broader Western mystical tradition. The Renaissance and Hermetic traditions were heavily influenced by Kabbalistic ideas, especially the mystical use of symbols and divine names. The Rosicrucians and other occult movements also adopted elements of Kabbalah, blending them with alchemy, astrology, and magic. The idea of a hidden, secret knowledge that could be accessed through mystical practice became a central theme in Western esotericism, largely because of the influence of Jewish mystical traditions. One of the most significant responses to Jewish mysticism came from Maimonides, the 12th century Jewish philosopher. Maimonides was deeply critical of the anthropomorphic and magical elements in early Jewish mysticism, especially the descriptions of God in Shiur Koma and other mystical texts. Maimonides believed that such visions of God were metaphysical rather than literal, and he emphasized that God cannot be described in human terms. He argued that the mystical journey was not about achieving a literal vision of God's body, but about understanding God's nature through reason and philosophy. Maimonides' influence helped to shape a more rationalist approach to Jewish thought, and his works, particularly the Guide for the Perplexed, became central texts for Jewish philosophers in the Middle Ages. His critique of mysticism and the magical practices found in earlier Jewish texts influenced later Jewish intellectuals and philosophers who sought to reconcile mysticism with rational thought. Despite Maimonides' critique, many of the ideas he opposed continued to influence Jewish thinkers, particularly in the context of Kabbalah. Kabbalists found ways to incorporate rational philosophy into their mystical system, blending the teachings of Maimonides with the visionary experiences described in earlier mystical texts. Early Jewish mysticism shows us that the path to divine knowledge wasn't just about visions. It involved powerful rituals and sacred names. Mystics didn't see magic and mysticism as separate. They were connected and worked together. This mixture helped shape Kabbalah and influenced many mystical traditions that came later. The journey through the heavenly palaces and the divine transformation of the soul left a lasting mark on how we think about the connection between the spiritual and the material world. These early teachings still inspire people today, reminding us that understanding the divine often requires both vision and action,